So we're working on one of the last articles in our course, and this is Canadian um, presentation, Canadian article written by Brian Hracs. It comes from the Canadian Journal of Urban Research. Places, Spaces of Celebration and Protest, Citizenship, Civic Conversations, and the Promotion of Rights and Obligations. Heavy stuff, right? This is written by a sociologist, an urban planner, someone who is going to bring together a lot of the different disciplines we've been looking at, but he's going to put them or point them in a specific direction. And this is towards the idea of all of popular uses of public space for political organization, for political action. Hracs says public spaces in democracies serve a lot of purposes. And I've just keyed in on several of them because he does indeed go through a lot of detail in his presentation. He believes that public spaces ought to promote decent societies. I think we might all agree with that public spaces ought to promote good societies, decent societies. Now, how do we define that? We might disagree, but still. They should combat the malaise of modernity. He likes this phrase, the malaise of modernity, that the modern world has become so complex, so fast-paced, that we develop sort of a malaise, a good French word, that indicates that we may not be able to comprehend everything that's going on. We may not be able to possibly deal with it, cope with it. So why bother trying to understand it, right? So we've got to combat that, he says, in a democracy. Public spaces and democracies ought to advocate for citizens to come together to express opinions about the world, not just about their own city, their own community, their own country, but about the world in general. And finally, he says we should find creative ways to provide access to virtual spaces from physical public spaces. Now, that means, of course, wireless access, but also the idea that if you're enjoying outside public space and you've got electronic devices that you're using to communicate with, you need to have some kind of cover perhaps from sun, cover from rain, so that we can actually communicate with each other wirelessly and share ideas about the world wirelessly in a face-to-face context. So, moving on, he says public spaces in cities are sites for celebration. They're sites for protest. They're also places to witness, to share ideas. And by witnessing, we think of witnessing in the old-fashioned sense, this idea of sharing ideas, sharing your own examples with people about issues of the day. We want to encourage civic conversations in public spaces. And then Hracs goes on to quote Christopher Hedges, one of his favorite writers, who's a theologian, Hedges is, but he's also a political commentator. He commentates on public society. This is in Hracs, page 2. He says, from Hedges, we have been robbed of the physical spaces where we could once carry out meaningful discourse and debate, where we could participate in our society as citizens. Community centers, village squares, town meetings, the public spaces that made democratic participation possible have been replaced by privatized spaces, by shopping malls, where we are permitted to enter as consumers and forbidden to enter as citizens. The privatization of public space has pushed us into the lonely virtual worlds of television and the internet. It has cut us off from others. These isolated, deadening virtual worlds are curious hybrids. They give us the illusion of being part of a powerful, although anonymous, community. Sentimental drama and tawdry spectacle from reality television, shows to huge sporting events and saccharine musicals fill the empty caverns of our inner life. These spectacles have become a common cultural experience and provide the common vocabulary for communication. We sit for hours alone in front of screens. We are enraptured by bread and circuses. And while we sit mesmerized, corporations steadily dismantle the democratic state. We are kept ignorant and entertained. This is an interesting comment, isn't it? This idea that most of the examples that we've been looking at in this class have related to the idea of government in its relationship to the citizens and how entertainment may come into play, how we want to see cultural exhibits and museums. We want to have the Keeper of the Plains. We want to enjoy our Shakespeare in the park. That we like our government providing that. Now, Christopher Hedges is going to suggest that now, because we're living in a consumer society, and if you'll remember Mary Ryan, she was interested in that element too in the parades in San Francisco, right? That now that we live in a consumer-based society, that we are really overwhelmed with consumerism. And on the internet in particular, you can see this with apps and downloads, etc., and subscriptions, that we really are finding that the democratic state is being dismantled by corporations. Wow, provocative statement there. You may disagree, I may disagree, but this is a very interesting trend. The idea that malls have replaced the public square for shopping, right? You go into a mall, which is a private space, and you're allowed to come in as a consumer, but we have seen, there have been some examples, even here in Wichita, of if you are wearing a politically offensive shirt, say, the mall may ask you to leave. So it's really a public space, if you will, but it's really not. People come to gather in a mall, but they don't have the opportunity to express themselves politically should they wish to. So Christopher Hedges, a very interesting, provocative statement that Hracs is putting forward to you. So Hracs has two proposals. He says that we should think about the protection and improvement of the rights of citizens, and that protection and improvement of rights for citizens requires conversations among citizens as an obligation of citizenship. Let's say that again. The protection and improvement of rights for citizens requires conversations among citizens as an obligation of citizenship. Public spaces can contribute to opportunities for civic conversations, whose outcomes will influence the quality of life. So he's looking at issues about quality of life, but he's also looking at issues of citizenship. He says also these conversations that take place among citizens have to be all the citizens, not just those in the cities. We've been focusing on the city, and Hracs is in Canada. And Canada, much like the U.S., has wide expanses of agricultural land, wide expanses of mountains and timber, forested land, and certainly lots of great cities, but it doesn't mean that conversations like this only take place in cities. He says non-coercion, non-forcing, non-coercion, and the rights of non-violent expression and assembly are conversations that can take the form of celebration or of protest. So these conversations might be sitting around talking about the issues of the day. They also might be forms of celebration or even forms of protest. As the lives of citizens become more complex, civic conversations are no longer confined to official or designated public spaces. So it's not just the town square. It's not just the town hall. It's the internet, it's blogs, it's the mall. There are all kinds of places where these conversations and these demonstrations, these celebrations can take place. For Hracs' thesis, he absolutely begins and ends his argument with this idea that citizenship embraces certain rights and obligations. Citizens should devote time and effort to exchange thoughts with others about the world, to influence decisions, and also to provide checks and balances on those who hold power in society. So citizenship has the right to express your opinion, but also the obligation to devote time and effort to ideas, to developing and exchanging ideas, if only to provide checks and balances on those who hold power in society. Therefore, he says, access to places and spaces by citizens is an important element for promoting full citizenship. He's also going to talk a little bit about the complexity of modern life and how modern life somehow seems to interfere with our citizenship, the exercise of citizenship, our responsibilities there. First off, he wants to talk a little bit about the individual versus the community. It says, with the rising emphasis on individualism, insufficient effort is made by significant numbers of citizens to be concerned about collective interests and the lives of strangers. I'd ask you to consider whether you think that's true or not. Do we have a rise in individualism in the past couple of decades? Do we see the internet sort of contributing to that? Are you less concerned about the lives of strangers than you might otherwise be? Are you more concerned about the lives of strangers with the internet? He'll take us back to the Greeks and to the Romans, and that's really fun for us, that he's taking us back to that world. He says in Homer, and I'm sorry to say he doesn't give you a reference for that, but he says in Book 2 of Homer's Iliad, there's a scene where Odysseus is talking with the gathered Greeks who are trying to decide what to do about Troy. And it's a clear democratic involvement, the discussion. The men don't always agree, and that's okay. But they're having the opportunity to assemble and discuss. He gives you the example of Cicero, and he gives you Latin, but he doesn't really... Hey, how's it going? He gives you Latin, but he doesn't really give you the opportunity to translate it. But he gives you this business of the res publica est res populi, so that the res publica, the republic, the state, is the people. The thing that is the state is the thing that is the people. Literally is what that translation means. And so that you don't have a republic without the participation of the people, and you don't have the people without the state. Hracs also, again, talks about this role, this connection between the people and the state. And one of the things he talks about with regard to big public spaces is that in antiquity, in the Renaissance, before the advent of democracy in a modern sense, that we did have public spaces, we did have communal space, but oftentimes this was the result of great powerful people creating these spaces and making sure that these spaces were available to the population as a whole. They weren't democratic in any way. So you get St. Mark's Square in Venice, that was actually the creation of powerful people wanting to create this great public space, much like the Romans did in antiquity, and wanting to be thanked for it as a powerful person. So absolutely, these great public spaces were done by very powerful people. Here's Florence, and this is a drawing very much close to the time of Florence, and it shows a great religious procession, large numbers of people at the Great Duomo in Florence, Italy itself. If you've been to Italy and you've been to Florence, you hopefully will recognize the Duomo and the whole square there. One of the other images I want to give to you, and I'm hoping to edit out some of this, but we'll see what happens. I may get an ad here, is a while back, some of you may remember this, there was a Make-A-Wish Foundation effort. Sorry, you're about to get a nice ad. Try to cut that back a little bit. There was a Make-A-Wish Foundation effort to try to get a young boy who wanted to be Batman. Whoops, sorry, here we go. This is an ABC presentation, so take a look at what happened.
Everything seemed to be going wrong today in a place called Gotham. A damsel in distress strapped to tracks. A bank full of innocent citizens about to be robbed. And a beloved team mascot kidnapped and abandoned. With two notorious criminals on the loose, a city wondered, who could possibly help fight all of this crime.
Breaking news from San Francisco's Hall of Justice.
Please, Cape Crusader, we need you. And bring the Bat Kid.
It was an enormous undertaking, fit for a real hero. And luckily, he's already on the way. 5-year-old Miles Scott is currently in remission after battling leukemia. But he always wanted to battle the villains of Gotham City as Batman.
Because he's my favorite superhero.
Miles used to watch the classics with his dad, Nick.
Breaking world's records is just part of crime fighting, Robin.
We started watching the old Adam West Batmans, and that's how he got started on it.
And for this extraordinary day, the Make-A-Wish Foundation helped bring his dream to life.
There have been plenty of superhero wishes that Make-A-Wish has had over the years. Nothing like this has happened.
They started planning to take over San Francisco back in March, hoping to find 200 volunteers. But then his wish went viral, becoming a social media sensation. And participants turned out by the thousands. His exploits documented throughout the day on Instagram. While all around the city, roaring crowds and cheering spectators put any parade to shame. And it's a good thing, because they were in need of some serious help today, with nefarious criminals the Riddler and the Penguin wreaking havoc. While his little brother watched on as Robin, Miles, aka Bat Kid, raced all around town, accompanied by a volunteer actor dressed up as the elder Cape Crusader. Bat Kid saved the damsel in distress, a woman with a suspicious device tied to her back. He stopped the Riddler from robbing a bank and handed him over to the cops.
It's all part of the plan!
Even saved the San Francisco Giants mascot from the evil hands of the Penguin. And with the criminals in custody, the feds even presented an indictment. Those villains now facing the possibility of serious time. And of course, a bust of epic proportions has national implications as well. Even President Obama congratulated the crime-fighting tyke.
Way to go, Miles. Way to save Gotham.
Bat Kid saves the city!
At City Hall, the mayor presented our hero with a key to the city before a joyful crowd of thousands.
The streets of our city are safer because of you.
Made of chocolate, of course, a treat for a champion. All in a day's work for one superhero who left a lasting legacy with one grateful city.
So you should ask yourself, so why this video, right? We started off before showing images of how St. Mark's Square, how Florence were designed by people who were sort of affluent folks who tried to create this public space for people. The video on Bat Kid indicates how there's public space already created in San Francisco. We have a need to sort of celebrate this young boy, right? How are we going to do it? So the Make-A-Wish Foundation got together, and this thing, using the internet, went viral. And while they were hoping for a couple of hundred people to show up as volunteers to sort of be an audience for this kid to save the day, I hope you could see from the video put together by the ABC News organization that thousands showed up. People left their jobs. People lined the streets. They went home and made posters. I'm kind of choked up just thinking about it, right? So these folks took time from their day to celebrate this kid and his big wish, which was just fantastic. And so they flooded the streets of San Francisco. They went to I think it was the baseball stadium, right? San Francisco, is it the Giants now, right? Baseball stadium. They went everywhere to celebrate this kid, even to the steps of City Hall, to celebrate this kid in his wish that he wanted to have recreated. This is an extraordinary example of using public space to celebrate. And it's also a great example of how the internet, Instagram, Facebook can bring people together to celebrate, to lift each other up, to have a great experience on behalf of a young kid and his family, and it went national, right? So it's an amazing example, and this is what Hracs is talking about, is that we need to figure out ways to combine public space and to combine the internet to create these things that support ourselves, support each other as citizens. Now that's a feel-good one, right? That's sort of supporting a kid who has a great wish. But there are other issues that should get us as involved, right? And uplift us in this way. One of the other things he talks about in his article is that public space is shrinking. Public space is shrinking. And I think that we might agree on this in some ways. He says great civilizations, and we have certainly looked at great civilizations from the past, great civilizations, like great cities, share a common feature. Evolving within them and crucial to their growth and refinement are distinctive informal gathering spaces. Again, whether it's the theater, which is a very formal gathering space, or the marketplace, an informal gathering space, right? That these kinds of spaces seem to be shrinking in society. I think you can probably see that with the parade video, with the parade essay, where one of the reasons we have a celebration where people line up and go in a straight line throughout the streets of the city is that we didn't have any informal or formal space big enough for a city of millions to have a kind of common celebration. So we use the streets because that's the only space available that can make this happen. It is Oldenburg, whom Hracs is quoting, who talks about how the first places that we have when we think about our space, our own personal space, is home. Our second place where we communicate with people, we interact, is at work. And then finally, our third places might be our squares, our parks, our plazas, the piazza. So we need these spaces, right? We have our homes where we participate, we think about life, the world, politics. We have our workplace where we also engage in this. For some of you, it may be work, it might be school. And then also we have public spaces, places where we are entertained, where we enjoy our culture, where we enjoy each other's company. With the advent of modernity and individualism, right, there are some tensions here being pointed out. Individualism is indeed a fine achievement, where we're celebrating the worth of the individual, the value of the individual. We certainly have had societies in the past where we don't value the individual nearly as much as we should, right? We have outlawed, at least in this country, slavery. We still find images of human trafficking and examples of that we were trying to get rid of, but still a big issue today. So individualism, valuing the value of the individual. However, along with that, philosophers will suggest that we've lost a heroic dimension to life, that we somehow don't have heroes anymore. And so when we see the Bat Kid video, we're reminded of the importance of the heroic. Individualism may flatten or narrow life. It may also lead us to have less concern for others. So again, the Bat Kid video reminds us that heroes are important. It reminds us also that in that particular example, the Make-A-Wish Foundation, that we are buoyed up as individuals when we are able to express concern for others. Another element of modernity, and it's the philosophy of instrumental reason. Some of the elements of instrumental reason relate a lot to utility. You know, what's the value of something? Does it have? Is it useful? Can we achieve measurable outcomes? Right. So we want to quantify everything. With the dominance of technology, we actually can do extraordinary database searches, right? We can search things. It's amazing the kind of data, the kind of information that's at our fingertips. We can measure things so much faster than we used to be able to. And so we seem to really be consumed with this idea of finding meaning or value in things that can be measured. Hracs says this makes the marketplace, consumerism, this makes the state even more powerful in our lives today. Again, that may be something you want to debate. That may be an individual decision. But it does seem that because technology can give us lots of information very quickly, that marketing, consumerism, really, as you well know, starts to invade your internet access in a way that's very difficult to stop. You have to work really hard at it. One of the reasons I like Blackboard as a platform is that we can control whether or not there are ads coming in, invading your learning process. I can't do that so much at YouTube, right? And the state becoming increasingly powerful. It's easy to, I don't have to tell you, the internet as a medium of communication, the only group powerful, the only institution powerful enough to create such a thing is the government. The internet is a product of researchers at universities and connected to government researchers who wanted to talk quickly, more easily. And so we just had a Supreme Court decision, right, about whether or not if you're pulled over for a traffic stop, the police officer can check the information on your phone, right? No, the Supreme Court said that now it requires a warrant. So it used to be that if a phone was in the car that was being pulled over, a computer even, a policeman could search that if they needed to find more information on you for whatever reason. And now the Supreme Court's saying, no, that's unreasonable. We can't do that. So there are certainly times when the Supreme Court can hold the government in check on getting having more power with regard to information technology. But certainly, as you well know, for other issues that have been going around lately in society, whether it's the NSA, the National Security Administration, doing wiretaps, gathering data, there's lots of great debate there. So, instrumental reason. We can also lead to loss of resonance, depth, richness in our human surroundings. So, philosophers are worried that with the dominance of technology, with this idea of measuring outcomes, right, that achievement and other things are related to data and measurable outcomes, that the market, the state gets increasingly powerful, and that we as humans lose some kind of depth, some kind of richness in our human surroundings. The political consequences Hracs talks about here are interesting. So if we are losing some of our power, as Christopher Hedges has suggested, to the marketplace, if technology and the extraordinary use of it, whether it's drones or other kinds of surveillance, make you think that your government is getting too powerful, there are some political issues here. Quoting de Tocqueville, who is a Frenchman who visited America early on, over 100 years ago, maybe almost 200 years now. He says, individuals are often enclosed in their own hearts. So with individualism, we get this concern that we are somehow closed in our own hearts. Citizens enjoy private life so long as governments produce the means of satisfaction. This is probably true. So we enjoy our private lives, we enjoy being individuals, so long as we are satisfied with our governments. Such satisfaction can and does lead to low political participation. We can track this in our own society, that if we are satisfied with our government, typically we don't show up for local elections that much. We aren't all that interested. And then finally, one of the interesting issues of modernity, so one of the political consequences, is that in order to have people engaged, they need to have a feeling of belonging. They need to have a sense of belonging regarding their citizenship. And that's something that's very difficult to quantify. So some conclusions from this article, and there are lots of ideas in this article. I hope you'll read it and maybe read it again to see what you think about it. Because I think that there are lots of ideas here that are going to be beneficial to almost any final project, almost any research element that you can be working on. But Hracs argues that planners and others have the responsibility to help design places and spaces in cities, in countries, to promote opportunities for civic conversations as part of the general project to enhance the quality of life for all in both the short and the long run. Right? Hracs is convinced that full participatory citizenship, and that citizenship where you have not only the right but also the obligation to participate in government, in society, will enhance the quality of life for individuals and for communities. So planners and others have the responsibility to help design places and spaces to promote opportunities for civic conversations as part of the general project to enhance quality of life. Active citizenship, he says, is economic participation, public service, volunteer work, and other efforts to improve life for all citizens. Economic participation, whether that's your job, investing in your future with education, perhaps even donating some of your money to civic projects. So economic participation, public service, choosing careers, if you will, that are public service oriented, whether it's teaching, nursing, civic work, working for governments, working for state entities, right? All of that. Volunteer work, and then other efforts to improve life for all citizens. That's active citizenship. Communities can become fragmented. You've seen this in the American Parade essay. Communities can become fragmented as people create small communities around cultural, professional, recreational, and spatial identities. This is something Ryan thought she was seeing in the American Parade, right? That people went from thinking of themselves as somehow New Yorkers to thinking of themselves as Irish New Yorkers or female New Yorkers or pipe fitters, electricians, and New Yorkers. Some of you might be soccer fans versus American football fans. Some of you might be gathering in some other kind of recreational fashion to identify yourself, right? So communities can become fragmented as people create small communities around different identities. Again, thinking about this idea of identity in a city. It's not, again, we're getting it a little more complex than just at the beginning of class. Public spaces need to inspire security and a sense of belonging. Virtuous citizens are helpful, respectful, trustful, even when they differ on matters. What can city planners do to create space, preserve space, create opportunities for communication, and thus promote good citizenship that is active, virtuous, and responsible? Hracs closes his essay with a quote from another sociologist, Frankenfeld, and he talks about technological citizenship. And again, I think this really resonates with us today. But we also want to consider how this resonates to our class in this idea of citizenship, the city, public space. Citizens, he says, should have access to information. Absolutely. Citizens should participate in public decisions. How can we do that? How can we participate in public decisions in the 21st century in which we live? Citizens must give informed consent. They must, when they go to the voting booth, be informed if they're going to offer their consent to a particular candidate or to a particular initiative on the ballot. Citizens have to accept a reasonable level of risk when they engage in this decision-making process, when they use information. Citizens must achieve technological literacy. I think this is probably aimed more at people of my generation than your generation. Still, we have to achieve the kind of literacy that is not just the ability to work an iPhone, the ability to conduct a search. We have to also have the kind of literacy that allows us to discern between those sources on the internet that are acceptable, that are well researched, that aren't just yelling, adding noise to the discussion, but actually adding meaning to the discussion. We have to, as good citizens, engage with the problems of the day. This is that malaise of modernity. We have to care. We have to engage. We have to do it with good information. We have to engage in public decision making. We have to be informed. We have to accept that there's some risk here, that sometimes in this process the decision may go the way we don't like it, and that's okay too. We have to be literate with regard to technology. We have to engage, and all of this is to protect the public good. Finally, Hracs says the time is ripe for planners to seek new and imaginative ways to construct places and spaces which accommodate access to virtual places and spaces with physical ones. So we've got to have the best of both worlds, he's saying. We've got to engage electronically, but we've also got to engage physically. We've got to see each other face to face. We have to develop a sense of community with each other that is polite and that strives to achieve good for one another. Sometimes, as you know, it is very easy to be anonymous online. It isn't easy to be anonymous in this class. We've got to put ourselves emotionally, physically, intellectually in the shoes of our neighbors, right? And that kind of conversation, that kind of connection is only enhanced when we can actually see the person we're talking with, we're discussing our issues and our options with. So virtual and physical spaces need to work on bringing those together, Hracs says. Planners have an obligation to share responsibility with other professions, organizations, citizens, to contribute to this debate through their efforts to design places and spaces that serve the noble end of developing meaningful, civil societies. Let's say that once more. Planners have an obligation to share responsibility with other professions, organizations, as well as citizens to contribute to this debate through their efforts to design places and spaces that serve the noble end of developing meaningful civil societies.